want to take a moment to reference the frame problem that I see a lot of people getting caught up on in the specifically in the fields of like philosophy, AI, sense making in general, like logic, computation type deal. The frame problem, if you don't know, you've probably heard some form of it if you're even remotely philosophically inclined. It's the issue that there's an infinite number of interpretations of literary or even scientific work, and or at least it can be perceived that there's an infinite number of interpretations, and most people basically reflexively choose which I guess side of the truth they fall on due to bias, and then mixed with that there's a sense of the fundamental incompleteness of knowledge, and the problems that poses are that, I mean, we can never be sure if what we know is actually real. So I would like to point out that that's actually nothing new. It might be a new framing, a new context of that problem, but uncertainty has been a feature of every free-thinking human endeavor since people could really tell stories. That's the first part of it. So just because we know we're ignorant, that doesn't mean progress can't be made. And that sounds like a contradiction or a paradox or an oxymoron or something. It's not. It's just the fact that you can progress towards things that are pragmatically true in the absence of laying a direct claim to 100% objective, irrefutable truth. Nothing's really irrefutable. Nothing's really 100% correct. People have known that for a long time. At least people who do the thinking and aren't the recipients of the thinking. So a lot of this frame issue, when people talk about there being an infinite number of interpretations of a work or whatever, what I really see is, one, the application of like literary modes of thinking or artistic modes of thinking or like narrative analysis modes of thinking into inappropriate areas for that sort of analysis. So like, for instance, if you're analyzing a book, there's a lot of different interpretations because you can't definitively say what the author's objective was when they were writing the book. You can infer some conclusions are probably more likely than others, but at the end of the day, there's no mathematical proof for that interpretation. However, if you're talking about something, like I see this being used to frame the transgender issue a lot. If you're talking about something like somebody's particular way that they prefer to be referenced, there are a number of interpretations that you could, want to be called as your personal preference because that's the story you tell yourself, and therefore that's a narrative arc. But to assume that everybody else has to play by that story is actually kind of what 4-year-olds do when they're playing house, and they insist that you have to play by the rules of house even if you're not wanting to play. So it's childish. You can't cross the narrative analysis and the biological / physical science sort of analysis without getting yourself into a sort of loop of, well, is that really real? Which is obviously not productive for your everyday life. Unless your goal is just to like say that there's no meaning to anything, in which case I wish you a swift death, because basically that's all that you're asking for when you say that there's no meaning to anything and that you're a speck on a pale blue dot and all that, is that even though it may be true, that's entirely counterproductive to your life, and ultimately all you're going to give yourself is a clinical case of depression that you memed into existence. So I would recommend you not do that, and you not argue for things that make you weak. That being said, that's one of the problems I see with people wrestling with the frame issue, is that they they project narrative analysis onto the domain of physical science. Don't do that. It's that's an area that people aren't really. I would say that it's just counterproductive. There are mathematical proofs for a reason. There's a reason we don't apply mathematical proofs to Shakespeare, for instance, and why we don't apply literary analysis to scientific research papers. It's just a whole nest of worms. You get into constructing a meta-narrative, and I don't think most people, or it maybe anybody, I don't know if anybody's actually equipped to do that in a coherent way. The other thing I see is people in the humanities trying their hand at criticizing the sciences. Now, I think most people in the humanities aren't actually qualified to be in the humanities, because in order to actually study humanities are a lot more difficult than science. Let me just put it like that. But, well, for many reasons. One of the reasons is that you can predict where a galaxy is going to be in the next 500 years, and if you were around in the 500 years, you could actually see that your prediction would come true. However, you can't predict what a human being is going to do in the next 20 minutes, which makes humanities actually a far more difficult and informationally dense field of study than the sciences, than the quote-unquote hard sciences. Now, the only reason these things are considered soft science is that I don't know that there's anybody alive smart enough to figure them out in a concrete way. So they're soft not because they're easy or because they're stupid or because they're not informationally dense. They're soft because we are, effectively. So our best minds, the 1 in 10,000 people, go into physics and hard science. And does that mean that a 1 in a million person would actually be smart enough to handle the humanities? How many of those people might there actually be? So basically what happens is the psychology departments, even though that's the most difficult field of science from just an information density perspective, get populated with the dumbest fucking people that this world can produce who can actually read a book. And these people, they get involved in some sort of like philosophical syllogism that belongs 3,000 years in the past, and they proceed to criticize things that they really don't understand, like statistics, from the standpoint of like abstract logic. And you can make an abstract claim that statistics is impractical in some ways, but at the end of the day, if you don't understand what people are doing to a degree well enough that you can replicate it when people are doing regression equations and that kind of thing and factor analysis, you should not use your ability to philosophically abstract in a literary sense to criticize something you don't get. So partially it's just people who are highly literate and completely innumerate trying to criticize things that they have no real training or study or anything in. They don't even get it. They just don't understand. So, and that's partly because our society treats illiteracy like it's a cardinal sin, but innumeracy is like a joke. Like, oh yeah, I'm a little bit innumerate. Haha, I'm really bad at math. Like, imagine somebody using that same framework of reference when they're talking about literacy. Like, yeah, I'm just a little illiterate. Haha, isn't that cute? It's like, no, it's not cute. You're illiterate. Read a fucking book. But we use that language with innumeracy all the time, and that's an issue. And that leads people to criticize things which they don't get based on, basically a misquotation or misrepresentation or an incomplete analysis of some of the facts, basically. So, if you're in the frame problem and you're struggling with these quandaries, just don't fall into any of those two traps, because they're a complete waste of your time, and you're trying to solve problems that people have already solved, honestly, several thousand years ago. So, yeah, I recommend you don't waste your time on that. Like, the answer's already there.